are building the future of decentralized exchange. So the problem is that currently DEXs are not very useful. Most trading occurs on centralized exchanges, and if you've ever used a DEX, you see that they're first of all much slower, have much worse spreads, are expensive to trade on because you have to pay for your own gas for the trades, and have very limited offerings. And just for the average user for mass adoption, it's just too much friction to use. So you can see this is IDEX, the highest volume DEX to date. And even for the most liquid trading pair, ETH to TrueUSD, this is the chart. And you can see it's highly illiquid and very inefficient. So the key insight here is that DEXs should not try to just copy centralized exchanges. Instead, DEXs should find real needs that centralized exchanges cannot fill. And we've seen this work in 2017 with Ether Delta, which was the very first DEX that really gained mass adoption. And the reason people put up with Ether Delta with its very poor interface and unintuitive order book was because we could find in Ether Delta all the ICO tokens that were not listed on exchanges. So Ether Delta was the only place you could find liquidity for these tokens, and that's why people used them, even though they were so bad. So currently today, a few years later, centralized exchanges, you can find some pretty good spot and margin trading, but of course for limited markets. In fact, many coins get delisted because they're afraid of regulatory exposure. And of course, some staking and lending, like Binance, where you can stake and lend your coins. And very limited derivatives markets. So you have mainly perpetual swaps, such as on BitMEX, or futures on mainly just top coins, like maybe the top 10 or 15. You won't find derivatives on let's say number 50 market cap coin, for example. And very limited European options on again the very top coins. Whereas in the traditional derivatives markets, it's a gigantic market with estimated $1 quadrillion worth of notional value, and a gross market value of around 12 trillion. But it's also one of the most restrictive and exclusive. In fact, if you want to trade any of the more interesting derivatives beyond just the ones here like futures and options, you have to get what's called an ISDA license. And this license is reserved for only the very top funds. You have to have an AUM of at least $1.5 billion, and it's rumored to cost itself $25 million just for the license. And this will allow you to trade basically, it's called a hunting license because you can basically trade any derivative on the market. And kind of the vision for crypto was to have a very open and inclusive financial system where people it's permissionless. And this is one big area that we are targeting. So that brings us to Injective Protocol. So we are a fully decentralized layer 2 derivatives exchange built on top of Ethereum that is front-running resistant, scalable, and extremely flexible. And I will explain all these points in greater detail. But our first flagship product, since the derivatives market is very big, we are creating a decentralized SAFT futures marketplace for upcoming ICO and IEO tokens. So our first product, like I mentioned, are cash-settled SAFT futures. And for those of you who aren't familiar with these terms, a SAFT is an acronym for Simple Agreement of Future Tokens, wherein it's very similar to a venture financing, where funds can get allocation in a token project for the token itself at a future date at a given price. And of course, when you have the ICO or IEO, the price is always above, and that's how the funds make profit. Sure, so there's actually a lot of demand from funds who actually want to hedge their positions for these futures. So suppose Matic is having an IEO, or initial exchange offering, which they actually did on Binance a few months ago. And let's just say for this example, it's happening next month at a certain date at 1 Matic to 1 TrueUSD. So, and let's say Alice is a fund that holds Matic SAFT and wants to hedge her position by shorting Matic in case the IEO price drops. And even though the prices skyrocketed for past ones, eventually we've seen them come down. And to hedge against that exposure, because these funds do have lockups, this is something very valuable for them. So, since the IEO price is known, Alice can enter into a short position by over-collateralizing to create a future Matic token. So she does that. Let's say she wants just one Futurematic token. She can post 2 True USD into the Future Smart contract. So we worked with Uma to create this contract, and it follows their architecture very, very similarly. So I'll skip over some details. So it goes into the issuer margin, which then mints one Futurematic, which is an ERC20 token contract. Then traders can decide to buy the Futurematic before the IEO even happens. They gain exposure to the IEO by just buying 1 True USD, by sending 1 True USD. And this is really important because for the past few IEOs, the supply has been very artificially restricted because, of course, people like the exchanges want the price to go up. And one way to do that is by artificially restricting supply. So there are many people who, and they have a lottery system now, where you can't even, you don't know whether you can get exposure to it or not. So you have a lot of traders seeking to get exposure to the underlying, but cannot. So we see it's a very proven demand for this kind of product. But anyways, they can then buy 1 Futurematic token. Then on IEO date, the Oracle begins supplying price feed data to the smart contract for the actual Matic underlying price. There are 2 scenarios here. In the case that Matic goes up, Alice will be liquidated once her collateral ratio goes under 1.5x. But she can avoid this, of course, by posting more collateral. If she doesn't, and the liquidation price hits, then she will be liquidated, and she'll pay a 10% penalty fee. The other situation is that Matic goes down, and which means that on contract expiration, Alice will have made a profit, and then the traders, the takers, will have just lost money, of course. So that was our futures product explanation, and now we'll talk more about the protocol itself. So, like I said, we are a layer 2 scaling solution that has a lot of other security properties. One is that we post a decentralized order book where trades are matched and executed by a sidechain relay network. And the key difference here is that the trades are both matched and executed. And execution is done on Ethereum, which means that users, so the trades are executed on behalf of users, so the users pay no gas for their trades. It's also front-running proof, which I'll describe how we do in a few slides. And it's also integrated with Cosmos IBC to allow for interchain trades. So front-running. For those of you who don't know what front-running is, it's a very, well, at least in the real world, it's very illegal practice. Where suppose you go to your broker and say, I want to buy 1 million shares of Apple. Your broker could then, with that information, first go out himself and buy 1 million shares, and then sell it right back to you and make an arbitrage profit. And this is, of course, extremely legal in the real world, but happens all the time on DEXs. Because the transactions on Ethereum are public from the mempool. So you can see the transaction, and then post the same trade with a higher gas fee, causing miners to prioritize their trade over theirs. So we solved this problem by, first of all, our structure. Our settlement logic orders trades on behalf of the traders and then settles them on Ethereum. And this is a very fundamentally different way of how decentralized exchange has been done. But second, more importantly, we use verifiable delay functions, which is a novel cryptographic scheme invented last year, which we use as a proof of elapsed time to establish publicly verifiable decentralized timestamp. And we also implement very novel mechanisms from the real world, including selective delay and soft cancel. So selective delay was basically pioneered by an exchange in the real world called the Investors Exchange, which also was created to prevent high-frequency firms from front-running. And their solution was to literally have 50 miles of fiber optic cable in their office that the trades go through, and then using the selective delay to prevent that. But what this is that basically make orders and cancel orders are prioritized over take orders. So then, let's say the price moves and your positions are not optimal anymore. You can cancel your orders very, very safely, and you know that your orders won't get sniped. We also implement the idea of soft cancels, which is an improvement upon 0x, because previously on-chain cancellations, of course, cost gas. So we allow for cancellations without any gas. So to give you a better idea of how BDF works at a high level, so suppose you have at block 1, a trader wants to take an order. So he begins computing a BDF proof on top of the order that he wants to take. Then later on in time, a different taker, suppose a front runner, wants to take the same order. He will also begin computing a BDF time proof. But by the end of block 2, when they submit, the taker A's time proof is longer. So our sidechain's settlement logic will order them accordingly. So this is a very simplified model. I skipped over a lot of details about the actual settlement. So, yeah. So there's some features about our exchange. We are fully decentralized, which means we have no centralized components whatsoever, including, so we have a client software for a P2P communication for the actual orders and the actual interface. And the protocol itself is community governed and using the token. We also allow for very advanced trading because we are, in a way, regulation resistant, because we are so decentralized, meaning that if all of us die tomorrow in the company, after the exchange is launched, the protocol would still live on. People could still use it as intended. So this gives us a true flexibility in product offering because, as you guys might or might not know, the derivatives and futures markets are one of the most regulated markets in finance. In fact, LedgerX right now, trying to get approval with the CFTC, has been going through basically a shitstorm in order to just get approval on Bitcoin futures. And we also, of course, offer margin trading and derivative products that aren't found in Texas. We natively support leverage, which I didn't have time to talk about much in this presentation, and also have a simple interface for traders for the mass adoption retail traders to use. A bit about our token economics. It's used for proof of stake security on our sidechain, and our sidechain actually receives exchange fee from the orders that they generate. Also, the exchange fee proceeds are sold in periodic batch auctions for INJ, which is our native token, which is then burned. So this is a very high level of our overall token economics. So timeline, next quarter, or this quarter, we will launch our testnet, and then we will have our token offering around Q2 of next year, and which soon after we will have our mainnet. So this is our team. We're a very small team, very close-knit. I studied CS at Stanford and worked at Amazon Open Zeppelin, and our members here are very talented. And yeah, we're also hiring. So if you are a good developer, front-end, back-end, Solidity blockchain, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you join. So this is my email. Thank you.
Did you have some questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, just one question from me, because I noticed that you guys are layer 2 solution.
Yes.
Layer 1 is Ethereum. So,
Yes.
it's very smart to rank your trades in the side chain,
Yes.
but execute them on the Ethereum chain. But just a question for me, because the Ethereum chain as of now, the transaction throughput is only about 15 transactions per second. So how do you guys, if let's say your adoption is great, a lot of users come in, there's a lot of trades getting executed, how do you guys plan to mitigate that? Or how, because now the transaction throughput on Ethereum is still pretty low.
Yeah, so after we launch, our next version is of course on Plasma. So then you don't have those same problems. But because for our first version, to do Plasma on top of all the new innovations that we are working on, it was just too many unknowns. So for our first stage, even though it is, like you said, slower, we're just sticking with Ethereum for settlement.
The proven one first.
Yeah, exactly, and then building on the Plasma after.
I like the idea of auctioning off the exchange fees for your native token. How did you come up with that mechanic, and how does that compare to just the buyback and burn?
Yeah, so basically the exchange fees. So our exchange fee model is what's called negative spread. So we take sides on both sides of the trades. And because it's like permissionless, anyone can list any token. So that will result in like potentially many, like let's say small market cap coins. And like lumping them all together and doing an auction, we found was like the most efficient and easy mechanism. I guess we didn't explore other mechanisms. I guess most importantly for us was the deflationary aspect for this to allow for token value control.
Do you like, are you just YOLOing for compliance, or so theoretically, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to fulfill some, it's like with a buyback and burn or like something like that, where it's basically there's kind of guaranteed revenue for token holders, right? Like how do you, there's, some people might say that there's like compliance risks. I tend to be more open, but yeah.
Right. Well, I guess like since the auction is governed by a smart contract, like right, like that part we're not very worried about compliance-wise.
Okay.
So regulation has been something that's been on our mind, which is why we made every pain to make a protocol as fully centralized as possible.
Sure.
Because otherwise we are opening ourselves up to legal exposure.
Sure.
And the kinds of
the more programmatic it is, the less
and
legal risk there is.
you know, we want to offer basically in the future, like beyond just SAF derivatives. That's kind of the starting point. After that, we're targeting high barrier entry markets such as Chinese equities. That's one idea that we're having, and of course, offering a futures exchange on that is like to do it in a centralized fashion is, and of course, we don't have the money to like hire all the lawyers and do that. And even if you did that, like LedgerX is a great example of what can go wrong. So yeah, we've gone fully decentralized, so we can offer basically everything. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is really cool. I'm also from Stanford. I'm at the law school.
Oh.
Yeah, I work with them when they.
Oh, no way. Okay.
It's cool. Have you kept up to date with Ben Fish and Benedict Lewis's work?
Yeah, I mean.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I thought. I was like, this is really familiar. It's cool.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah, actually, Dan was my advisor.
Okay.
Yeah, so
We'll talk.
Benedict, yeah, we had, so this PDF was invented, released publicly at least, around June 2018.
Right.
So we had calls with Benedict like July. So we started working on it 1 week after
So cool.
the paper was released. So
Very good.
yeah, I mean the recent stuff like not so much, but we're using the basic. So about BDFs, the BDF ASICs are being actively developed right now by Ethereum Foundation, and you know for our model, yes, there are more efficient BDFs, but what is more important, I think, is people to have equitable access to like to the BDF commodity hardware. Because if you have a faster laptop computing BDF, it's kind of unfair, right?
Yeah,
So we're sticking with the simple one that the Ethereum Foundation is developing. Okay, let's definitely talk after.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.